Okay, good afternoon. My name is Bob Stone. I'm a partner and relationship manager at Telemus Capital in Southfield, Michigan. Today, we have our guest, Sam Damren, who will be talking to us about how to spot a con or a confidence man. We'll discuss that in history a little bit. But Sam is now a retired attorney, used to be work at Miro as well as Dykema. And prior to that, he was a prosecutor for Wayne County and assistant U.S. attorney in the Detroit office. And as a matter of fact, he has a book coming out that kind of discusses the bookends of his career on some of the more interesting cases he's had over the years. And I would strongly recommend you take a look at it. It's kind of scary what goes on in the real world when you go through that stuff. So today, like I said, we're going to be discussing how to spot a con. Sam's going to kind of give a history of it and then kind of things that you should be aware of, and then we'll kind of clean things up at the end. If you have any questions, please wait till the end. Or on the panel to the right-hand side of the screen, there's a way to raise your hand and add some questions in, for which we will answer at the very end. So with that, we'll get it started. Sam, thank you very much. I appreciate you doing this for us today.
Well, this will be fun. I would like to begin the discussion with a thumbnail, essentially, of the history of confidence men. And I'm going to use that history to help us acquaint ourselves with the way con men have acted in history and bring us up to date as to how they exist in today's financial landscape. The term con man itself is a pretty broad brush. Today we're going to be focused on a narrow slice of that. And that narrow slice is going to be what I refer to as the master con artist. We're not going to be focusing on people who simply misrepresent facts to pry your money loose from your wallet, although con men do lie. We're not going to be focusing particularly on folks that abuse your trust in order to pry money out of your wallet, although con men do abuse your trust. And we're not going to be talking about Ponzi schemes. Ponzi schemes have a shelf life. They're a deception that can only last so long, Bernie Madoff notwithstanding. What we're going to talk about is the master con artist, and that's the one that you really read about because they almost never get caught. The literature involving con men has a long list of techniques that authors add up and say when you put all these together, you get a breakdown of how con men effectuate their frauds. That list includes things like the put up, the play, the rope, the gambit, the breakdown, the send off, and a whole bunch of other terms. But as I've reviewed the literature and have seen in my experience, when you really look at what con men do, it breaks into three basic stages. The first stage is a con man's goal to become your special friend. The second stage, after becoming your special friend, is for the con man to present you, the mark, with a special opportunity. And the final stage, which is only dealt with by master con artists, is getting you to own the special opportunity as if it were your own. Now, these three stages neatly set forth the history of con men and explain how the cons have become more sophisticated over time. So if we start with the first goal of a con man, to become your special friend, I'm going to ask Bob to relate to you the story of con man William Thompson from 1849 New York City. And it was Mr. Thompson that newspaper reporters first coined the term confidence man, which was later shortened to con man.
So Sam mentioned Mr. Thompson lived in New York in the 1840s, and he was a well-dressed gentleman who would approach the upper-class people of New York, pretending that he knew them, and began a brief conversation and tried to befriend him as quickly as possible. And after gaining a man's trust using tricks of persuasion and tactics, Mr. Thompson would ask, have you confidence in me to trust me with your watch until tomorrow? And somehow these people did believe him, did trust him, and he would take their watch, and Mr. Thompson would depart, never to return again. And he played that con out on a regular basis in New York City and was very, very good at earning people's trust throughout the years.
So William Thompson only achieved the first stage of what is a successful con. He got people to allow him to become their special friend. It seems almost incredulous that his con could have worked, but it was in an era when gentlemen were of a special class and viewed themselves as of a particular breed, and so would trust each other if they wore the right clothes and knew the right people and so on. Of course, the first stage of the con man, becoming a special friend, didn't help him avoid being caught. So you really need to go to the next stage of the con, that is presenting a special opportunity to get to the first instance of where somebody's going to be able to work a special con, and that is to the special opportunity. And a good example of that is something that still goes on today, but it goes on in different variants. It's known as the Nigerian prince scam, but the one I'm going to ask Bob to talk about is called the dropped wallet.
So the man who perfected that was actually a guy by the name of William Elmer Mead, also known as the Christian Kid, because he was brought up in a very puritanical household and didn't believe in drinking or smoking cigarettes, so that's how he got his nickname. But he invented a trick where he would drop the wallet, and it wasn't just any kind of wallet. It looked like the wallet of an incredibly wealthy man or important businessman, and when it was returned, when the contents were returned, he would seem to confer to the person, whoever was returning to, was a man of means, and the mark, believing that he was a man of means and a great financial mind, would offer the person returning the wallet a financial opportunity, kind of at a suggestion, and the details were essentially wrong, and people would be duped or tricked into believing that this man had a great investment, just happened to be there at the right time, and they would end up investing in this bogus opportunity, all because they found the wallet of an important businessman.
Yeah, so this particular con involves two stages. First of all, the con man becomes your special friend, or in this instance, it's kind of turned around in that you become the con man's special friend because you turned his wallet back to him. But then he presents the special opportunity, and you as the mark are totally unsuspecting because you believe, well, this is just a reward for me doing a good thing, which I did. So you have confidence in the con man. And the special opportunity turns out to be a fraud. You think that you've been given this wonderful investment opportunity when in fact it's a deception, and the money you part with, you never see again. Now that'll work, and it works still with certain segments of the population. It works in particular with people who are isolated, in particular senior citizens. This type of scam goes on all the time over the internet and mailings. But ultimately, to fleece the wealthy, you need to get to the third stage of the con man's game. And that stage is to get the mark to own the special opportunity as if it was his own. And explaining this is going to require two examples. Bob will relate the first, which involves having the mark own the opportunity only in the sense to, once he owns it, to walk away from it. And you'll see why in this story.
So the person we're talking about is a guy by the name of John Marbury, and John was a con man some time ago, and he and 80 different associates would essentially fix sporting events, and had an operation called the Millionaires Club. And basically what he did was he convinced people to come to these fake sporting events, bet thousands, anywhere between $2,000 and $50,000 in terms of the outcome of a boxing match, a prize fight, a wrestling match, fake horse races, and people would put their money down thinking that they were betting on a legitimate bet, and he would pay off the police to walk in at the right time, and everyone would scatter because they were afraid to be arrested. and the sporting event really never occurred, and John would walk away with the money, and the people would run away because they were afraid they were going to get arrested for gambling at an illegal operation.
Now, all of you on this webinar should recognize this as the climactic scene to the movie The Sting. And what you have to understand is in this third stage of the con, that is getting you to own the opportunity, what's really happened here is you own the opportunity in the sense that you own the risk of placing a wager, an illegal wager. So that when the police, the stage police, show up and everybody scatters, you're going to say to yourself, well, I lost that wager because the cops got it now. And you're not going to blame the con man. And that's the trick to this third stage of a successful con man. Henry Gondorff, which is the character that Paul Newman played in The Sting, was a real person. He had a brother. He wasn't anywhere as noble as Paul Newman was in the film. He and his brother spent a number of stints in prison for a whole series of cons that they got involved in. You know, the problem with this con is that it requires a great deal of orchestration and can fall down if you don't have Academy Award-winning actors involved in it. This is basically the history of cons up until the last few decades. And it gets us to the second stage or the second segment of our presentation, which is how con men identify their targets. And in this section, we're going to confront what I refer to as the master con artists of today. And the master con artist is involved in the third stage of a con, that is getting the mark to own the con in a very different way. This variation deals with a blind spot, and blind spots we'll discuss a little bit later on. But the con man in this type of sophisticated fraud finds a blind spot in his potential marks that's a vulnerability, that something in the mark's life has left them feeling that they're not complete yet, that they need just one opportunity to successfully show who they really are. And they also often feel as though they've been unfairly treated throughout their life, either because of a particular personal situation or just by the circumstances of the greater society. Now, I know this sounds like a jumble of psychology, and it is. And it's way too complicated to get into in a 1-hour webinar. But what I'm going to do is give you a window into that through an example. What I'm going to show you and demonstrate is that this particular trait that con men look for in marks is exactly the same trait that the leaders of terrorist groups look for in their followers. I think I got your attention now, so let me explain exactly what I mean by that. After 9/11, there was a book, it's entitled The True Believer, published by Eric Hoffer in 1950, that I always thought every American should be required to read. Eric Hoffer was born in the 1890s. He had a hard-scrabble life in New York City, immigrant family, and this was the first book he ever wrote in 1951. He worked as a laborer throughout his life, never educated at a college, but he was a man of remarkable insight, good judgment, and a very direct writing style. His book came to note because it occurred just after World War II, when everyone was worried about mass movements and wanted to understand how what just occurred in the world could have possibly come about. And Hoffer explains it very well. The true believer is the human fuel for mass movements. And what Hoffer was talking about is bad mass movements. Now, history repeats itself, and that human fuel that fueled the Nazis and other groups in the 30s is the exact same type of human fuel that provides for the terrorists and the leaders of terrorists today. And Hoffer hit it exactly right. He said that what these leaders look for in their human fodder is people who view their current lives as, quote, irredeemably spoiled. They have a deep anger at the world. They're not the poor, the helpless. They're generally come from a group of people who look forward to success in life, only to have it taken away from them because society drifted in a different direction. And they feel as though they've been left behind, they've been forgotten, they've been unfairly discriminated against, as if their entire life is irredeemably soiled. Now, the leaders of mass movement present these people with an opportunity to redeem their lives. They say, forget the present. I offer a vision of the future in which you can be the person you were always meant to be. And they turn these angry people into true believers. And Eric Hoffer says the most important quality that you can see in a true believer is what he calls unequaled fortitude. And that is, quote, the ability to shut your eyes and stop your ears to facts if they contradict the leader or his vision of the future. And that is exactly the type of quality that a master con artist looks for in his marks. Now, how does this translate into financial fraud? Bob and I are going to talk about that in the third segment of our presentation today, and that is how con men view you, your family, and your wealth. In order to get to this third stage, and the variant that I'm talking about involving getting the person to own the special opportunity, a con man has to do his homework. He has to identify that blind spot in a person. They're feeling that their life has been irredeemably spoiled, and he has to present them with a special opportunity that allows them to right that wrong. And Bob's going to give you an example.
So over the years, we've always had children of wealthy families who, for some reason or another, the old adage was from shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. You have an entrepreneur who makes a wealth of money for the family, and by the 3rd generation, the kids are spoiled, used to that opportunity in their life. And a lot of times what happens is a con man will come along and tell him that he can get back to that by investing with him, by working with him, and allowing him to kind of grow that family wealth back to where it was, so he can maintain the lifestyle that he has. They're more susceptible to it. They want to believe that they can still be wealthy, yet the family wealth has disappeared, and so they tend to be more susceptible for something like that.
Now, there's an example out there in the real world, the Theranos situation that occurred over the past couple of years. That really involves all aspects of cons, but some of the initial investors were folks who kind of chafed at their situation. They were not the people that made the money in their family. They always wanted to be able to prove their own self-worth. They chafed that they had been unable to do so. And so I've seen in some of the comments of these early investors, even the comment that they intended to save the world. And it's this type of special opportunity that makes the mark own the opportunity. In other words, they become invested with what is in essence a fraud, because they can't see the fraud, because they're blinded by the fact that they want to prove themselves and they want to save the world, make their mark on the world, or something like that. And so that allows the master con artist to completely hoodwink. In fact, they hoodwink themselves because they come to own special opportunity. There are tricks and trips that con artists use to get to your blind spot, and that's in the 4th section of this presentation. I've talked about blind spots for a bit. Most everyone has a blind spot. Some of those blind spots can be taken advantage of by con artists. Some of them just allow you to be taken advantage of by certain elements that might occur in your life. And the essence of a blind spot is that you don't see it. So it's pretty hard to guard yourself against your own blind spot. But even when, excuse me, a person doesn't have a blind spot, con artists are apt to help create one. And one way they do this is through distraction. And the best example of this is from pickpockets. I mean, think about pickpocket in 3 stages. First, there's the guy that's just going to bump into you and take your wallet. Okay. The more sophisticated pickpocket has someone else bump into you while they take your wallet. The bumping into is the distraction. The third and more successful pickpocket has someone bump into you, someone take your wallet, and then they hand your wallet off to someone else in the crowd. That way they're better able to cover up the fact that the person who took the wallet doesn't have it now in case somebody's caught. But all of these examples are based on distraction, and that is the bump. The strange part seemingly is, why does a bump occur in a crowd? There's a reason for that. And that's because when you're in a crowd, just like when you're driving your car on the same route home that you always drive on or to work, you're basically on autopilot. And if something happens out of the ordinary, you tend to react to it as though it's normal. So when you get bumped in a crowd, you're going to get bumped in a crowd. You don't realize until later that your wallet's gone. The second example in which con men take advantage of blind spots or create them is isolation. And that involves, once a con artist has found out what your blind spot is, and say it's the vulnerability of a second or third generation of a family of wealth to feel that they need to prove themselves. Once they see that and they become your special friend and they put together a gambit, the special opportunity, then what they have to do is isolate you so that you don't go to other people for assistance, or that if you think about it, you have a reason not to do it. And so what they do is they tell you things like, well, this is a secret opportunity. You can't tell anyone. The price of admission to it is secrecy. So that's a technique in isolation that pulls you away from folks. It can be a lot more complicated than that, and often involves a demonstration. Okay, you want to see a demonstration of how this opportunity is going to work? I'll do that. And so, particularly with technology, which in Theranos' example was a technological wonder that was going to produce just a small amount of blood, was going to be able to quickly produce an analysis of all kinds of things and change the way medicine would work throughout the world. And I'm sure they put together demonstrations, but what they didn't do was put together a demonstration that would satisfy someone adept in the field. And so they put together a demonstration in which you alone, the mark, or some of your fellow marks, are the ones who are watching it, but you don't have the expertise to fully analyze it, and you can be duped. It becomes no different than a game of 3-card Monte or just a simple magic trick.
And if you notice, most of their board members were non-medical, non-technical people like George Schultz, who had no idea what was going on in terms of the science behind it.
So that's something that plays out a lot today, particularly in terms of companies that want to become disruptors. And that is, it's a big deal to be a disruptor. You're going to change the industry. You're going to change the technology. You're going to do something that's going to change the world. And a lot of the investors in hedge funds don't have the technical expertise or allow somebody to present themselves as having technical expertise that don't, and they can get into a lot of trouble with these types of investments. You end up seeing what you want to see and hearing what you want to hear instead of correctly providing adequate due diligence for it. So a blind spot is a real problem. it turns you into your own worst enemy. And so the question becomes, what really can you do if you do have a blind spot? And there's no foolproof answer. If there was a checklist for spotting a con, I'd be happy to print it out and distribute it to everybody in the United States. But there is no such list, and there never will be, because cons are like viruses. They mutate, they continually change, improve, if you will. And so there's no foolproof way to find a con, particularly if you're a potential mark and have a blind spot. There are some things you can do. And one of those things is another analogy. It's like if you have a nice house in a neighborhood and you don't want to get burglarized, the smartest thing to do is to make your house seem like the most safe house on the block. And that way, while you still might be a potential mark, a con artist is more likely to bang on the door or find his way into the home of a neighbor who doesn't seem to have all those protections. And if your neighborhood's well protected, then they'll go for lower hanging fruit elsewhere. So those are the type of things you can do. And I think Bob can better explain those in detail.
So bottom line is don't make financial decisions in a vacuum. I always tell people that you should have a team, someone that you can trust, that's set up well in advance of any kind of investment opportunities, whether they're legitimate or not legitimate, well in advance of those things coming to you to look at. And if you don't have a team, I would tell you, put together a team of trusted advisors, a good CPA, a good tax attorney, a good financial advisor, and a registered investment advisor. And a registered investment advisor is a specialized person who has fiduciary responsibility to do what is right for you, and have that person review the investment opportunities that come in for you. And finally, don't make snap decisions. If someone's going to give you an opportunity, then always tell them you'll think about it. And if you're not 100% confident that you can make that right decision, go to your team and have your team review that for you, and see if there's holes that can be punched in it, or if it's a legitimate opportunity and they agree with it, then go ahead and do it. But never do anything in a vacuum, and always use your team to help you make those financial decisions.
I think you have to recognize, if you're a member of that team, that in certain instances, you're going to be really pushing upstream. Because if your client has that blind spot where they've felt as if their life is irredeemably spoiled by the fact that they haven't been able to make their mark in life, they haven't been able to show who they are, they really sometimes have a heartfelt desire to invest in something that will allow them to do that. And you're going to be, if you're on that team, you're going to be pushing really hard, and you're going to be chopping hard to say this investment has got to be looked at more and more. And your client is going to be saying to you, this is in my heart. Are you suggesting that I not invest in what is going to be the thing that's going to change my life? And it's very difficult. And many times there's nothing you can do to get somebody who's become sold on something to change their mind, particularly so if they've been isolated earlier on. And that is, if the con artist has gotten to them and they've already gone down the stream of the investment a certain degree before you, as a member of the team or the financial advisor, can come in and bring your thoughts to bear. So it's not an easy challenge in some instances.
A lot of times people will be too embarrassed to admit that they made a mistake and that they were conned, that they were duped. And a lot of times we don't even hear about these just because they're so embarrassed that they made a human mistake, an error.
And that brings us back to what I was talking about at the beginning of this presentation, is that master con artists who do this, who become your special friend, who provide you with a special opportunity, they ultimately get you to own the special opportunity as your own. And if it fails, those kind of marks, either out of embarrassment or because they believe this was just a necessary attempt to make their life right and full. When it fails and they lose their money, they're not going to complain about it because it's something that had to be done.
I think you originally said to me some of the greatest cons you'll never know about because no one's ever willing to admit it and no one even knows that they were conned.
Exactly. And this goes way back in even prosecutorial history. One of the famous Supreme Court justices in Michigan in the 1940s was a country prosecutor, and he used to remark about the fact that many people who were victims of cons had an almost childlike belief in the fairy tale that they'd been told, and they wouldn't prosecute. And while it's not a fairy tale, the things that Bob and I have just been talking about, it nonetheless is something that rarely gets prosecuted if the con is properly posed, properly positioned, and picks the right mark. So that's our presentation today.
I think we're going to open things up for questions. Not sure how we open things up for questions, but we're going to open things up for questions. If you have any, please raise your hand or go ahead and I think you should be unmuted. You can go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, if anyone has questions, there's the raise your hand feature in the control panel. Yep, so we have a question from Cliff. Let's unmute Cliff.
Go ahead, Cliff.
Cliff, if you could type #96# to enable muting. Doesn't look like you're on the audio. Here we go. Cliff, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So this is a great discussion. I wish I would have had my parents on listening. You just described my mother. She was in love with Theranos and was absolutely convinced that Elizabeth was the next great coming of you-know-who. So would be a good discussion sort of starting point, and or maybe it's the book that you mentioned from Eric Hoffer, to engage my parents in being thoughtful about not being a mark, because I can absolutely see my mother, who's now in her 80s, becoming a mark in the easy. It worries me to death.
Well, I think your experience is not your mom's experience with Theranos is very unfortunate, but there are as we get older, and my mom died last year at 99, and I was taking care of her for the last few years of her life, and I took over her financial affairs, and it was just shocking to me. She wasn't a person of wealth, but it was shocking to me what kind of cons showed up in the mail, and I ultimately took away her email account because she was having trouble with it, and the cons that showed up there were just revolting. But when you're old and alone and isolated, that's fertile planting ground for it as well. But to answer your question, I would first I suggest you read Eric Hoffer's book. It's a short book. It's eminently readable, and it goes into a lot more detail and a lot more of the convulsions of how these true believers come into existence. At your mom's age, she doesn't have to be a true believer to be swindled by somebody. And it all depends on where she was in life when the true believer was written, as to whether or not it's something she might want to read. There's not that many tools out there to help people deal with this.
Yeah, I would say on the opposite side of things, sometimes when a child or a sibling is involved in the process, they're a little too close to home, and they tend to, doubt their child. So, one of the things we've done with several of our elderly clients is really be involved at a pretty high level with that client and make sure that they've gotten to the point where they will bounce pretty much any ideas off of us, so that there's a second or maybe even a third set of eyes and ears overlooking any kind of opportunity. and really making sure before they distribute any money to anything that we've taken an eye on, and they've grown a trust factor with us that we know we're going to look out for them, and other people in the firm are helping out them. So having a trusted advisor, whether it's CPA, a tax attorney, or financial services firm, an RIA, that your mom can kind of bounce those ideas out. I think that might be a second source to help things out too.
I know that for you, Cliff, and many people in your situation, I mean, you deal with this tension of you want to protect your parents, but the way they look at it often is you're trying to take away my independence. And it's just tough, and you just have to persevere and keep at it, and know that ultimately you've got to get them to recognize that you're looking out for them, that life is a little bit different now. They may be the parent, but it's you are the one that's looking out for them, and presenting them with someone like Bob, who's an independent person they can bounce things off, or maybe just slow things down until you can get involved too.
It's easier for me to say no and slow things down than maybe a child. That's the way we look at it. Okay, do we have any other questions? Matt?
No, doesn't look like it unless someone raises their hand or types in a question. I think we are all set.
Okay, well, with that, I want to thank Sam personally for doing this. This is our first of many webinars that we'll be doing at Telemus, and Sam gets the distinction of being the first guest and speaker on what soon will be a tradition at Telemus Capital. So thank you very much, Sam, and thank you all for joining us. We appreciate it, and please stay tuned for other webinars that should be coming in the next month or so. Have a good day.